It's my great pleasure to introduce Mia Gallagher this evening. Mia's short story collection, Shift, was published earlier this year by New Ireland. It's a collection that does extraordinary things with voice, with language, with the innovative approaches that it takes to telling a story. It is magnificently strange. There are devils, hauntings of various kinds, a kelpie. There is a dispute between neighbours that turns increasingly surreal. And there are shifts in human relationships, sometimes beautiful, sometimes terrifying, but always written with compassion. These are stories where sentences unfurl to offer not just one, but several layers of meaning. The Irish Independent called Shift a blazingly intelligent, multi-level collection, saying Gallagher allows her readers space to actually read, to read into, under and beyond the text, which means the fictions linger and stick. And Bookmunch described it as a knockout and ferociously beautiful, saying Gallagher is a master of the liminal world, where we don't find what we expect, where the territory, which is initially familiar, is made strange by her embattled commitment to the complex and the unruly. Mia is also the author of 2 acclaimed novels, HellFire, published by Penguin in 2006, and awarded the Irish Tatler Literature Award 2007, and Beautiful Pictures of the Lost Homeland, published by New Ireland in 2016, and longlisted for the 2016 Republic of Consciousness Award. Reviewing Beautiful Pictures of the Lost Homeland in The Guardian, Claire Kilroy said, "It is challenging, it is brave, it is original, it is flawed, it is moving, it is fascinating, it is art." In 2016, Mia edited Stinging Flies, Fear and Fantasy issue, and she's a contributing editor to the journal. She has written and devised for the stage since 1991, collaborating with various theatre companies. Her theatre work has toured nationally in Ireland and travelled to the Czech Republic, Italy, Greece, France and the UK. She was elected to Aosdána in 2018. And I'm so looking forward to chatting to Mia about her work, but first she's going to read to us from Shift. Can we have a big welcome?
Thanks a million, Danielle. It's a real privilege to be in conversation here with Danielle, who's just such an extraordinary storyteller, and her collection, Dinosaurs On Other Planets, was one of the most amazing story collections I've read in years, and really delighted. I'm really delighted to be down in the Rebel City, home place of my grandfather, and thank you very much, Pat, for inviting me down. Yeah, I'm going to read from the title story, Shift. So I'll just give you a tiny wee bit of context. It's set in the last recession, before the last one in the 1980s, and it's from the point of view of Des, and Des is an unemployed forklift operator who lives in Cabra on the north side. So I think that's probably about as much context as you need. He'd been 3 years on the rock and roll. Sandra was up the pole again with Jason, and like every time before, nag, bleeding, nag. Why don't you look at the jobs pages again, Desi? That's Sandra. We need to get the kids their boots and uniforms. There has to be something there, Desi. Part-time, nixer. We can't survive on that welfare. Is it that you don't want to look, Desi? Is it that you don't want to be a good father to your kids? Is it you're thinking you'll keep heaping the pressure on me and I'll break pressure? Break, fuck's sake, he thought, but anything for a quiet life. So after the midday pint, he picked up a copy of the Herald, and it was the first thing he saw. Strong, experienced driver, needed for deliveries, house removals, etc. Must be willing to work late, cash in hand. Underneath that, a number, Southside. He gave them a bell. No choice, he told himself, not with Sandra breathing down his neck, while in his mind, Southside was whispering, drawing him. She wouldn't be able to keep tabs on him from the other end of the city. A husky voice answered, a woman's with a touch of the foreign to it. That was unusual back in them days before the migrants started. She asked a few questions, and that was that. Afterwards, Des would think it was lucky it was him who rang, because they might have been landed with the right ignoramus who'd have walked straight into it, and then maybe taken it wrong. Near the end of the call, she asked, are you of open mind, Mr. Maguire? Funny question, but he put it down to her being foreign. Open mind, he thought. Christ love, he wanted to say. I'm open to anything that'll put a few extra pound in my pocket and get the missus off my back. Oh, of course I am, he said, using the good voice he used at interviews. No worries there. The line went a bit funny then. P&T, useless at the maintenance, so he couldn't catch what she said next. Yeah, great, no problem, he said anyway, thinking, well, any job is better than none. It was only afterwards he copped. She'd been talking about Christo. They lived in Sallymount, in a lovely little place on the seafront. Real dainty from the outside, though it went down deep at the back. There were just the two of them, Isabella and Christo. The van was in Christo's name, so it would look like he was the one taking care of business. But it was Isabella who did all the bookkeeping and handled the orders. She was Italian, she told Des, used to be an opera singer. She'd come to Ireland before the war and fell in love with a doctor. Had Christo, stayed on, never went back. The communists, she said, with a sad smile, though Des hadn't been about to ask why. He never found out what happened to that doctor. A nice lady, he thought. Not wealthy, but grand in her own way. Very and glamorous was the word that came to him later when he was making his way back to Cabra on the 122. Jet black hair, eyes like Sophia Loren, an ivory silk dressing gown barely clinging to her shoulders. She was up front. He had to hand it to her. My son is depressive, she told us. He's a good boy, but he has problems. He can be moody. It's influenced by the weather. Uh-oh, thought Des, but she was staring at him with her Sophia Loren eyes, and her cleavage was moving with her breath like God himself had put it there. It's just, she said, and paused. Uh-oh, thought Des again. Her black eyes flickered, made a decision. Sometimes when his mood is not happy, he likes to dress up. That's why we need... Oh, no worries, said Des, interrupting, feeling his teeth stretch in a smile. Didn't ask. Dress up as what, Mrs.? Just added something about the world being a boring place if we were all the same, and all God's creatures, blah, blah. And she smiled, and even laughed, showing her own teeth, beautiful as a row of pearls. He hasn't thought about it for years. Not hard. The past is the past. But there was a programme on the box the other evening that had flashed up while he was looking for the Arsenal game. It's very difficult, they were saying to the presenter, to get the hands and the chin right. He didn't realise how hard he was staring till, Jesus, da, said Trina, over for the Sunday dinner. I never would have pegged you for a, he said, and zapped. That's just wrong. With Christo, it's not that he didn't notice, or he wasn't bothered. I mean, you'd want to be blind back then not to take a second gawk at a young lad wearing tights and a handbag. He didn't look brutal, exactly. When he wasn't dressed up, he was good-looking enough. 20-odd, slim. His hands were small for a fellow, but that programme was right. They did look wrong when he was all dolled up, and he was a bit too narrow in the hips for a real mutt, though from the side he was grand. Long legs. Shapely. Yeah. Like an ad for stockings. That part was all right. But the makeup, Christ on a bicycle. And even without that, Des would never have mistook him for anything real. The chap would never have inspired him to. You'd wonder sometimes why he'd stayed on once he knew. He'd only done a couple of jobs by then, so it wasn't as if he owed them anything. There was no contract. They had no rights. Even before Christo came down that morning, Des hadn't felt too easy around him. The lad was very shy. But you can put that to one side, can't you? A job's a job. And even when he appeared that first time on the landing in the green dress like an Aer Lingus trolley dolly with the wig and the slap, even though, yeah, it was a shock, Des felt a bale of bricks land on his chest, his gob slack as a half-wit's down at his knees, because what was it exactly that he was looking at? Still, he was somehow able to put that to one side too. There was money, of course, and Sandra. But it was awkward. You couldn't deny that. Des was bothered not so much on his own account, but more, how was he going to explain Christo to the customers? That first time, they were booked to do a removals job for an owl dog living near Leonard's Corner on the South Circular Road. She was moving out to Ballantyre to live with her niece, and it was a worry. He'd admit that, how she'd react. Heart attack, he kept thinking, whatever about the niece. Before they set off, Christo went down the road to sort out the van. Des was hanging on behind, standing on the front steps of the house, having a fag, catching his breath after, the shock. Then Isabella came up behind him. She'd headed out of the hallway before Christo had come downstairs. Now she was just inside the hall door. Des could hardly see her. They kept it so dark inside with all those green plants like a jungle. But he could smell her perfume and hear the rustle of what she was wearing. Another satin dressing gown. Black. Very classy. She leant over to him so he could feel the breath on his neck and put her hand on his arm. And it was then he figured it out. Why she'd left him on his own with Christo. She'd wanted to see what he would do. A runner or stay put. He's never been into any of that psychic crap, but it was like one of those premonitions, that déjà vu that Sandra kept banging on about. All Isabella said, though, was a whisper. Keep him inside the van, Mr. Maguire. So that's what he did. All day. Kept Christo inside the back door of the van, loading and unloading while he did all the carrying. He found it easy, and that surprised him. No, he'd say. Sure, there's a load of work for you to be doing here. I'm grandson, not a bother. Hardest day's work he ever did, but in a strange way, it was worth it. The owl doll wandered out a couple of times, worried about her china. Oh, God bless her, she was no Inspector Morse. She couldn't tell a green light from a red one, let alone a not too bad looking young fella in a dress from a real mott. And on the other end, the niece was a lazy dose. Stayed inside her semi-D the whole time, said she was down with the flu. Normally, Des wouldn't have taken that guff, but that day he'd have been prepared to offer up a novena to keep that wagon inside. So in the end, they were right as rain. They found their groove, little rituals, warning signs. Isabella used to give him black coffee and cucumber sandwiches on the days that Christo wasn't feeling too good. That was how she put it. Christo is not feeling well. Looking at him with her slow, black Sophia Loren eyes, the eyeliner at the edges peeking up like little cat's tails, and Des would nod, eager almost, like it was their secret together. She never waited for Christo on those days, always skedaddled, leaving Des on his Todd as if everything was all right as long as she and her son weren't in the same place at the same time. She didn't want to have to see it, and he could understand someone else gawking at her boy when he was like that. If she didn't see him witnessing it, she could let on that everything was A-OK, and Des found that he wanted to help her keep pretending. God knows why, but he did.
you so much, Mia. And it's amazing how much you can infuse into a character's voice and way of speaking and the way they converse with each other there, the distinctiveness of the voices. And I think the first thing I'd like to ask you about is the word I came across in an interview, I think that you did, or an article you wrote, psycholinguistics, and I think you mentioned that a character's psycholinguistics come to you quite early in the story.
Yeah, I suppose it's how a character, how they think about the world and how they think about it, like the words that they use. So it's almost like, I think I get almost like an emotional attitude first, and then the emotional attitude gives me the energy to sort of explore the character, and then pretty soon I suppose I start making commitments to where they come from geographically, and then in terms of social class, where do they see themselves, and then where do others see them, and then I suppose like age. So it's almost like kind of like a performance, you know, like I'm building the character almost from the inside out. I'll get the attitude, and then I suppose a character like Des has a particular way of being angry, which Isabella will have a different way of being angry, and then I guess I play with that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it seems like you're almost inhabiting your characters, I think. And I've noticed as well the wonderful way that their bodies seem to speak their minds. And how does that, I suppose, how does that work? All the different references to the physicality there.
Yeah, I think. I think working as an actor really influenced how I write now, because I think I only really learned to write fiction through spending years away from writing and devising and acting. So I would interpret characters, you know, that other people had written, and then try to find a reality and an authenticity, so an emotional truth for the character. But I would also improvise and create characters kind of from scratch, from imagination, or maybe, you know, we'd have a whole load of clothes lying around, so we'd make up a character. I'm just thinking of a couple of some of the ones I did. And then so one of the things, I suppose, from working in theatre, one of the things that I would be very interested in is the leaks of truth through the body. So, you know, how somebody may be saying one thing with their mouth, but actually their body language is saying something completely different, and how we're reading that all the time. Like we're animals, you know, and I think our animal intelligence is very strong, and often I think human beings make judgments and decisions about how a relationship is going to unfurl because they're almost smelling something from the other person. So yeah, I'm very interested in the kinesthetic and the somatic, if you want to give it a fancy word, but our kind of lived physical reality, and how that's not available. I think in a world which is everybody talks about kind of social media and digital media as sort of interfering with maybe a kind of more kinesthetic physical relationship with the world. But actually I think that there's not an intellectualization of experience that happened long before digital media. So it's really handy to blame Facebook and digital media for, okay, now we're much less embodied in our relationship with the world. But actually, you know, from the time of, I think you can hold the Catholic Church of the Middle Ages responsible for an awful lot. Like the body was something to be punished and purged and kind of denied. So I think there's a sort of intellectualization that has been happening. And I'm completely off.
That is exactly what I was hoping you would explain, because I think that story shift just opens with the way that Des is living and inhabiting his body, and we know that he's not in a good place when he wakes up that morning, and it's a wonderful way that you use the body to convey emotions and their minds. And on a related point, you have a line in one of the stories, it's Departure, I think, and it really struck me. it's a pity spirit is so hard to find without a body.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, do you think, are we always destined to be in that tug of war between body and spirit? Or?
Yeah, because that was a really old story. Like, I wrote that when I was just a baby writer, really, and I wrote that and another one, the first one in the collection, and then I stopped writing fiction for a while. But I included them here because I actually think they were the two pieces where I felt I was starting to learn to be a writer, so there was a sort of authenticity in it. So I was kind of quite interested when I read it again for this, thinking about whether to include it or not. I was sort of interested in that line because it isn't me, my older self. It's like, oh, I was interested in that then. Yeah, I guess, I suppose all fiction is autobiographical in a way, and in a sense it took me years to kind of listen. I get very excited about things, and I'm quite intellectual, so it kind of took me years to actually listen to, say, warning signs from my body. So for example, like just, I think like with children, that the idea of the no feeling, look, this isn't safe. So it took me kind of years myself to kind of go, okay, if I feel uncomfortable after having a conversation with somebody, like it could be that I'm an idiot and I've really not acquitted myself well in the conversation, or it could be that just this relationship isn't actually good for me at this moment in time. So I think maybe the stories, in a sense, like I'm quite a cagey person, even though there's bits of my life and, like in there for those who know me. But I think it's, in a sense, it's a process of maybe, like sometimes I find that I can actually process a troubling experience through writing a piece of fiction without knowing that that's what I'm going to do, So I just might find myself writing and getting really angry, and then maybe at the end of the story realising that kind of helped sort something out in my life.
I was interested to see that you, like me, are a fan of Julia Cameron
Yeah.
and The Artist's Way. Some of the audience have probably heard of this book as well. It was one of the first books about writing that I read myself when I was starting out. And do you do your morning pages as a writing practice?
I don't do them. So the morning pages are where you write for 30 minutes and you just fill 3 pages of foolscap. And I found them as a fantastic tool to start writing. I started that in 2000. Now what I do is I use them if I've got a problem. So if I have a problem with a character, or even if I have a problem in life with a business deal or something like that, I journal and I use the morning pages to just get everything out. So they'd be very sweary and very generally a bit annoyed, and then I usually get annoyed with myself, but then at some stage a solution will begin to I'll find myself writing what if. So if I have a problem with a character or a story that I feel I've kind of lost the run of it, I'll start off maybe by going, oh God, this is just shit usually, this is really shit, it's a terrible story, I'm terrible, I'm a rotten writer, I shouldn't be writing it. So that'll go on for a while. But then I'll try and ask myself, well, what exactly is shit about it? Everything? No, but really, okay, yeah, but which is the most shit thing? And then, an answer might, well, that bit there, and why is that? So I use it really, I suppose, as a journaling tool now, but I'm in between projects, and I am kind of in the back of my mind, I've been thinking I'm going to use journaling. I have a load of material written for the next book, but it's really, I don't know where I'm going with it. So I was just thinking about journaling and the morning pages, and I think just as almost like a practice, almost like a meditative practice or a Tai Chi practice to journal might help unlock, I suppose, what I really want to write about and help me find that. Because that's always the anxiety, is like, what am I going to write about? Is it going to be interesting? Am I going to be interested? And then, usually I'll worry about other people finding it interesting, but then really the big problem is if I don't find it interesting. So with any piece of work, I have to kind of chip away until I find, okay, this is really what I want to write about. This is what I'm interested in.
And you edited the fear and fantasy issue for The Stinging Fly. And I want to ask you about that because you had this wonderful expression where you said you had the privilege of being flooded by the fear vocabulary of hundreds of other people. And I wanted to ask you what you think it is that draws you to explore fear with such relish.
I'm quite a frightened person, I'm afraid of lots of things, and I always have been. And I would say I'm quite fearful. And I'm also, I love a ghost story, and I do love kind of genres associated with fear, so thrillers and horrors. I'm not great at watching horrors, but I quite like reading them. And I've always been drawn to kind of blood and guts and gore, even though I never watched Saw or any of those movies, but I kind of like read them sometimes with relish. And I remember the very first thing I had that was published was a poem when I was 9, and it was called What is Black. So that kind of, so I think I was a bit sort of like Wednesday Addams that way. But I guess the fear and fantasy wouldn't have happened if without Declan Mead, because we had a conversation, and I had been thinking, initially I was thinking of would it be interesting to find stories like dark fairy tales by women, and I guess a lot of that was because I love Angela Carter, and Declan had published this fabulous story by Deirdre Gleeson, which was the something of Dara. Anyway, it was brilliant. It's in Let's Be Alone Together, but it's a banshee vampire story, and it's really nasty. And I just thought, wow, I'm sure there must be loads of other women maybe writing. And then Declan was saying, well, why restricted to women, and why restricted to fairy tales? And then we just thought we'd cast the net really wide, and it was very interesting. The types, there was everything from dystopian speculative fiction to very, very intimate psychological kind of, they weren't really horror stories, but they were kind of, I suppose, exploring dread. Patrick Cotter has a very fine poem in Fear and Fantasy, which I loved because it was just strange. And I found that I think the final collection ended up being quite psychological more than genre, but it was a pleasure. I was listening to Paul McVeigh talking about judging the Sean of Whalon short story competition, and he read all 750 submissions, which is just brilliant. And I read, I think it was 335 fiction submissions, and I really enjoyed it. I think there was only one that I didn't enjoy because it was so misogynistic and kind of horrible. But everything else, I really enjoyed it. And some of them, they weren't literary, there wasn't maybe a very strong literary voice, but it was there was something kind of yucky about all of them, and that was great.
And do you see sometimes that fear, I notice in the story, sometimes the thing to be feared comes to be the thing that's embraced.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking in Lure, which is a wonderful story, where we have this mysterious dark presence, and in the beginning, the reader doesn't know what it is, but that comes to be a good force.
So it's interesting you say that.
I thought so. Yeah. Is it about approaching fears and embracing them, do you think?
Yeah, I suppose, but again, this is back to kind of biography, I guess, but I've found that the most painful thing the thing that I'm most afraid of experiencing or handling in some way or considering, often if I can allow myself sit with that and with the sensation which is in the body. So it's I think again we intellectualize fear and have all sorts of names, but if I'm sitting there and I'm afraid of something, and it can be afraid of being rejected by somebody, or it can be afraid of Trump, it can be anything, but it's the sensation is not, it's not in my head, the sensation is in the body. And I do believe that, I worked in a treatment centre for 13 years, and I worked with people who'd been in addiction and cycles of addiction. So I was really, I guess I'm very interested in trauma and how trauma stays in the body. And I think they've done some studies where they found that it stays in people's cells, in the cells of your body. So there are some therapies which can actually help you by putting you into it. There's some trauma therapy for, I think, children who've been involved, who've had traumatic experiences in conflict, and they found that if the child put themselves into the shape where maybe they heard the blast or they saw the gun, that there was something about being in that shape that allowed them, in a safe place, that allowed them to actually process the trauma. So I do think, and it can sound very, I suppose, it is new agey, yeah, but I think for me, my experiences, if anything has been really painful or a really hard emotional situation or something to fear, if I can just sit with it and try not to find a solution to that in my head and just sit with the sensation, you know, it kind of works itself out. It doesn't mean the situation doesn't get worse or that the thing that I'm afraid of doesn't happen. But I think that we are capable of so much more as animals, you know, as human animals, we're capable of so much more than we kind of think we are, maybe.
Will you read another bit?
Oh yes, lovely. Just distract myself from the... I'm going to read, this is, it's another domestic piece, I guess. I mean, Shift is kind of domestic because it's the story of Des and Sandra and Christo and Isabella. And this last piece is probably the most, it's kind of naturalistic, kind of, somebody described it as blunt domestic misery. But I think it's kind of funny in places as well. So yeah, I'll just read, I'll read from the beginning, so I won't bother setting any context. It's called With Soldiers in a Cup. When we get in, the house is even quieter than usual, and there's a dank smell lurking about, mushroomy and unpleasant, that I feel I should recognise, but I don't. The curtains in the front room are drawn, shutting out the miserable view. No deserted beach, no grey sea behind it. An overhead bulb glares, and in its uneasy light I see dents in the rented walls, corners peeling off the wallpaper, stuffing springing loose from the sofa. The African sculptures that Uncle Mick brought back from the missions hunker on the little ledge under the frosted partition window. They look obscene in the artificial light. Alien and dangerous. It's weird, isn't it? Whispers Jeanette, meaning the light. I nod. Man never puts on the overhead. It's always low lamps and candles. Cosy, she calls it. Christ, you used to say. It's like a bloody mausoleum, and I hate you again, a bit, like I did then, for slagging off her yearning to recreate an idyllic childhood that never fully existed in the first place. Jeanette and I are huddled together on the threshold, little girls again. Dad is sitting in his raggedy armchair beside the empty fireplace, head in his hands, small and grey, like a collapsed version of himself. He looks abject, the way he used to after he'd been hitting her, the ghost of fighting past. Outside there's a squelching click as Steve presses the fob and the 4x4 snaps into central locking, a scrunch as he walks up the gravel path and into the hallway behind us. Neither Jeanette nor I turn. Steve makes a whooshing sound with his breath, and alerted, Dad raises his eyes. They're red-rimmed, his iris is so blue they hurt to look at. I think of unhatched eggs, no longer edible, not quite chick. I think of the interrupted thread in the chat room blinking at me from my laptop at home, and I have to force myself not to turn and go. Dad lifts his arms, his hands are shaking. Jeanette pushes past me. Oh, you poor thing, she says, and folds him in her arms, her eyes wet. She releases him, pulls up a poof, plumps herself down. I move in for my turn, and he half stands. Our hug is awkward. He stinks of whiskey and aftershave and feels hard and tight, a dense ball of fury. I retrieve myself as soon as I can. Jeanette takes his hands, and like a nun helping a pilgrim into the baths at Lourdes, guides him back down. I balance myself on the edge of his armrest. His hand searches for my knee and I feel the stub where he lost the top of his little finger to the lathe rub against my skin. The story starts again, this time his version. It's pretty much the same as Jeanette's earlier that morning, Dr. Pills crying. But in Dad's mouth it's grown, my father, master of the story, of the comforting meal, of the righteous fist. He tells it so well I feel the savour of it pop on my tongue. Jeanette is good with him. I find myself astonished again at her skill. Keeps nodding, holding his hands, doesn't butt in. I feel all wrong on the armrest as if my seat bones belong to someone else. I wish I'd had the foresight to claim the poof. I wish I hadn't obeyed their summons. I stare at the carpet. There's a wine stain near my feet, shaped like a map of Portugal. They'd called out to me early. A dawn raid, 6:30. I've never known why we do it, why we can't just phone, why we pick the most ungodly hour in the day to pass on the bad news. But that's family. I was awake in the chat room, reading the threads again when I heard Mixie growl out the back. Then at the front door, the banging started, Steve doing his wife's bidding. I recognised his knock straight away. My brother-in-law has a very specific way of doing nearly everything, way too diffident before he gets way too loud. The reason he knocked, in case you're wondering, is the bell. It's still there, but it stopped working right after the builders came. A superstitious person would have blamed you for that, instead of the rookie Sparks who'd been too cocky with his suppliers. The dead don't like change, such a person might say. Maybe that's why those left behind are supposed to sit tight. Don't sell, don't emigrate, don't change your hairstyle. But people like me, unbelievers, people who are uncomfortable talking about the dead in the present tense say, no, that is just psychology, nothing to do with the supernatural. You sit tight in case you make a mistake. Do something you will later regret. And if I could have sat, believe me, I would have. But you left a mess, Connor, a total shambles. Said Jeanette when I told her. Do you think that's wise, Annie? I mean, the last thing you want now is more upheaval. What you need to do is to rewind. Rewind like I was a piece of old school videotape some lazy customer had forgotten to spool back to the start. But if you're determined to do it, you could always, oh please, Jeanette, don't. Stay with us a while. It's fine. It'll give me something to do, I'd said, pushing away Mixie's needy nose, and not thinking about that bloody contract at all, I swear. Anyway, it's a small job. It's not even a proper extension. And yes, but 8 months later, it's still unfinished, a plague of small jobs, breeding like rabbits, sockets that need repositioning, patches of duff plasterwork, that no man's land backyard, and the broken bell. Steve's rhythm on the door shifted from polite to obnoxious. The lines of sans serif font in the chat room flickered. Mixie barked louder. Oh, fuck off, you dozy mutt, I thought. And it was a dare. Do you remember the first time they called up? You and me at 25, in that cheap flat in Vibby, post-pub, 2 or 3 or something a.m, winding ourselves down after what you used to call a dirty, filthy ride. Their voices outside. Anne! Anne! Pebbles on the window pane. Anne! I'd been reading Stephen King. Thought it was a Tommyknocker coming to get me. You got up, pulled the curtain. Oh, Christ, it's your fucking sister. The hospital, bleak and yellow-green under the fluorescent lights, smelling of sick people, panic and death. Doctors, officious, bleary-eyed. Nurses with kind, sympathetic faces. Dad, his skin like putty, a tube up his nose. His heart, they said, man, always the silent one, the one who never lost control, sitting by the bed, holding his hand. How are you, ma'am? A nod. That was all.
And in that story, there's an example of something you do so well throughout the collection, and that's you mine words and concepts for a number of different layers of meaning. So that extension, that it's a problem in a very physical, concrete sense of a building. But we also have the extension in terms of Hooke's law of elasticity, where someone is under so much pressure and they're pulled and what's the point at which they snap. And that is something that I think works so brilliantly in that story. And I'm wondering, at what point did that come to you? Did it drop into your lap as a gift, or did you have to go and hunt it down?
Yeah, that really, the idea of the extension was something that kind of came in stages. So when I first wrote the story, there was the extension at the back. So basically, Anne is telling the story, and Connor is her husband who's dead. So he starts building this extension. So that was there right from the beginning. And then I was researching my second book, and I came across Hooke's law, which is an engineering law, which states the more elastic, it's a law of elasticity. So the more elastic a material is, the further you stretch, like the more you pull at it, the further it extends before it snaps, which kind of feels like common sense in a tautology. Like, it doesn't seem like anything that we don't know. But I just really loved it. And then I hadn't really a job for Connor, and he had a different name in the first draft. And then I thought, yeah, he's Connor, and I know a Connor, and I was kind of thinking, yeah, I think he could look like that Connor. So I don't really describe him very much, but I thought, like, it's a king's name as well. But also then I thought, oh yeah, he's an engineer, and then their relationship kind of got a bit more dimension, and then there's this other meaning of extension that becomes manifest, I hope, maybe, through the story, which is the one that's really kind of like bothering Anne all the way through, and that was a recent addition last year. I was just, I suppose, looking at how far I could really mine. Mine is a great word, yeah. Like how much meaning and how much layers, and I felt like it sort of deserved another layer. Because I didn't want it to be just another side story. Sorry, I'm very cagey.
So there was a lot of hard work and rewriting. Then it didn't just arrive in magically.
No, and I guess I feel like when I'm looking for something, my first novel was published by Penguin, and Patricia Deevy was my editor, and I remember her asking me what I thought was a really obvious question about one of the characters, and I was like, oh, is it not obvious? And she was like, no, it isn't. And I was like, oh yeah, okay, I'll fix that, no problem. And coming from, say, digital media and broadcast, where it's like, oh, problem in the script, fix it, it's all grand. So it's like, fixed this problem, and then fixing the problem created this whole moral dilemma for me with the whole book. So I actually had to go back into the book, because I'd done something really superficial with a character, changed how they looked, and suddenly I was like, oh no, I'm really not happy with the ending. I can't stand over it the same way, because the character has changed. So I'm quite superficial, like the way that character looked made me relate to them differently. So then the ending that had been there in the first draft just wasn't, I couldn't support it, I couldn't stand over it. So I guess I just loved how she would ask me a simple question, and that would really send off it would create a whole load of work for me to do. So I tried to do that for myself. And my current editor, Dan Bulger in New Ireland, he'll do the same thing. He'll go, that's great. He's from Philadelphia. That's really cool. What's going on there? And I'm like, fuck, because I would have like thought, I like playing with language as well, and I suppose I've been privileged to have been encouraged always as a kid, being quite precocious, but also from a very young age to be encouraged to write and told I could write well. So in a sense that's it's a burden in one way, because I can kind of skate over problems using language, and deeper problems that are maybe like, what's really going on? What am I really trying to say in this moment? And I do have a tendency to be a bit opaque. So for me, trying to allow there to be enough mystery there, like I love something where I have to work, when I'm reading it, where I have to work out what's happening, and where I haven't really been given, like I love mysteries, but I love reading something where they didn't fully, they've left me making up my own meaning. So that's what I try to do for readers, but at the same time, I have to really work to be very clear about what I do mean. And then it's like there's these hints and breadcrumbs in the text for people to follow if they have the time and the energy. But if they don't, I would hope that it still works on another level. So, I mean, I guess, yeah, and I don't know how in this age where so many people and so many good people are writing, and there's so much more books, like, will people ever reread these stories? But I would hope that if they do, they kind of go, like, oh, maybe that's what was going on.
You advise emerging writers not to do the hokey cokey on the page when they're rewriting, and can you just explain what that is?
So this kind of came out, I wrote an essay for the Stinging Fly about, Declan had asked me would I like to write an essay about writing shift, and I kind of found it a hard essay to write, because I started going into the narrative, I started the stories then, and then I did, and it was just really, I was boring myself. And then I started thinking, well, what am I really interested in? I'm really interested in problems, and it's something I've been at master classes and workshops. I'm more and more, it's like what we're talking about, embracing fear. I kind of invite anybody as students, like if there's what you want is a problem, and you want to have a problem that you need to work at, and that's the work. And then the story or the novel emerges out of the work. So it's like sometimes a story one of the stories here came pretty much fully formed. I did a little bit of extra layering after talking to Dan about it, but it pretty much came in like one go. But it had been fermenting for ages, so the problems I think had been working away in the background. But so the hokey cokey is when you've got a page, and you're typing it, and then you start editing it on the screen, and you start maybe changing there to they are, or there are, or then you start maybe changing your clauses in your sentence, and you're just basically massaging the same paragraph or the same sentence or the same page over and over again. And it's usually, and I remember talking to Chris Spinchy, the novelist, about this. It's like it's the same, you're stuck on the same page. And I've come to recognise that this is a sign that there's something fundamentally wrong with the story. There's a fundamental problem that I'm too terrified to face. So what I do is the easy stuff, which is putting in a comma, or changing the wording, or substituting an adjective, or taking out an adverb, or putting in an adverb, instead of doing the real work, which is saying, well, what's really the problem? So, for example, the story about the Kelpie, one of the issues with that was I wrote it fast as a commission for an anthology. And the ideas had been kind of there for a while, and I played with some of them in a play that I wrote for young people. But I think I wrote that first draft too fast. So the logic was initially all over the place, all over the shop. Like there was kelpies and rivers talking to each other and all sorts of stuff. And I just bullied my way through it by making the language really playful. So I thought, well, people will enjoy the language, and there's a story, and there's a gory bit at the end. So I'm going to force them through the story that way. But when I knew I'd have to do some work on it for this, and I sat down with it, and initially I was like, oh yeah, I'll just change point of view. So I changed point of view, and then I changed again, and then I started footering around with the beginning, and I kept footering around with the same paragraph, and it really wasn't making it any better. And then at one point it just went, okay, I really have a problem here, and I stopped and I looked at it, and I slowly made myself, what I did was I printed it out and I slowly made myself read through it and mark up anything that was a problem, and then basically, and be really honest. So, for example, like, who's talking here? What does this mean? What happened? What has just happened? What does this? So it was really basic things, like I was not me, like I was looking at a student's or another writer's text. And then what I did was I started looking at, okay, so these are the problems. I don't know who's telling the story. Why don't I know who's telling the story? Oh, I just don't know, I'm terrible, blah, blah, blah. And then then with a bit of patience, it was like, well, it's because I have so many partly because I was playing with point of view and flipping it and changing it. I'm not sure. And usually a problem with the story is something I'm not sure about. I haven't made a commitment to a choice. I remember being mentored by Jocelyn Clark, who's a playwright, and I'd been commissioned to write a play, which is another commissioning story gone badly wrong, and the play never happened, but it turned into a novel. But Jocelyn said to me at one stage, he was saying, so what are you doing here, and what do you want? I said, well, I like it to be ambiguous. And he was like, and he said, look, the thing is, what you're doing is you're not making a choice, and because you're not making a choice, the energy said, yeah, you can write grand, you're a good writer, but you're not making a choice, and what's happening is the energy of the story is actually getting trapped. So it's something that I always say to, because writers can be very coy. So if I'm mentoring somebody and I'd say, so what age are they? Oh, I don't know, I want it to be mysterious. No, you do know. You do know what age they are. Make a decision. You can always change it. But the minute you make a decision, it's like something inside moves. So my thing with Lure is, who's telling the story? And I'm not going to answer that now because I'm so coy, and I want you, that basically I think that's the conundrum that's the conundrum that the story presents, and that's what I suppose I am inviting readers to grapple with and to maybe find their own answers to and figure it out for themselves, if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. So I think when the reader steps into the story themselves, they're engaged then. So
yeah, it's like I love trying to think. Like David Lynch is one of my heroes. I like the Twin Peaks: The Return was completely bonkers, and like part of the joy of it, it was so mysterious and strange and weird. But there was a point where episode 5, which is just bizarre, or episode 8, and I was just sitting there going, I don't know what's happening, but I like it. And I guess, I'm not saying I don't think these are very Lynchian really, but I suppose I would like to invite people in, and I would like them to feel immersed and to engage with the characters and with the tone of it, and be bothered by them.
And you offer so much to your readers. You're very generous to your readers. There's one of the stories in this where you've almost invented a new language for the story. I'm thinking of Pin the Tail on the Donkey.
Pinning Tail on Donkey.
Did that take a long time to work out how that language was going to
work? Again, like that was, so Pinning Tail on Donkey is the story of these school children who are in this kind of vaguely dystopian kind of world. But it started off basically as a story, again, I'm going to be autobiographical. When I was 11, I had this situation happened to me in school where I was kind of being bullied in school, and a whole gang of kids made as if they were going to pour ink on top of me, and I freaked out and I went like that bang, and the ink went all over them. And my parents had to pay the dry cleaning costs, whatever. Remember, there was one girl, Janice, I can't remember her second name, and she had blonde hair. It was just like grey for weeks. But sorry, that's really mean. Yeah, my horrible little soul is being exposed. But I basically, it started off as a monologue, which I did in 2001. And it was, so there's a character, Maisie, the narrator is unnamed, and she kind of has a crush, she's 10, she has a crush on Maisie, who's perfect, who was actually based on somebody else from another traumatic school experience I had when I was 4. Anyway, but it was kind of set in the 70s, and then Dave Lorden asked me to contribute a piece to his Young Irelanders anthology in 2014. And I had just my cousin, who's really brainy and brilliant and works in advertising. She'd just been finishing a PhD where she was talking about, she works in advertising, but she's very ethical, and she'd always kind of struggled with the morality of advertising. But she'd done her PhD on non-profit sector and branding, and one of the concepts she was really interested in was social capital. And moral capital. So then, and there was all this was 2013, so there was there was all this kind of stuff about the 1%, and I've always been interested in economics, and I just thought, oh, why don't I just push it a little bit? So then it became this weird kind of world where, Christian fundamentalism has been replaced by monetism and wealth worship, which is so not like where we're living now, and then the language kind of, I guess, came out of that, and I just sort of played with maybe I love teenagers, and probably because I don't have any, and so it was a little bit of sort of oh my God, speak, and kind of those kind of memes and tropes from texting and all that, and then I just made stuff up as well. But the whole idea of, I just thought that you could have capital that was fiscal, capital that was moral, and capital that was social, and that basically you would turn, human qualities of compassion and kindness into something that could be monetized and could be seen as an aspect of wealth. Interested me.
And I noticed there's aim in instead of amen.
Yeah, wealth without end.
So it is a whole recreation of language, and it's really wonderful, the attention you give it to all of us on a word level. Admire that. I have lots more questions. I'm wondering, are we out of time? Yes, we appear to be out of time.
Should we give another 5 minutes then? Go on.
Okay, great. Okay, yeah, well, I'll ask you a few more questions then. Let's see. Which one will I pick? What are you currently working on then? Can you tell us a little?
I'm kind of not, I'm sort of in, to use art speak, I'm in a liminal space at the moment. So I'm between, I finished Shift in March, and then I've been really writing essays over the summer and doing writing reviews, which I really enjoy writing. So I have a novel which was, I started in 2004, and then bits of it became my second novel, and it's just been kind of going on for ages, so that's waiting for me. I don't really like talking too much about work, because I'm quite gabby, and if I talk about something, I feel like I kind of, then there's nothing for me, so I won't say much more, except that I'm dreading it and looking forward to it at the same time.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and can we have a round of applause?